Hello everyone, my name is Noel. I've invested a few hundred hours into Lost Ark since I had started playing earlier this year, and as the closed beta test of the game is happening this week, I'd like to give some help to those of you who are still hesitant in picking the class they'd like to play in the beta test or even on release. I also have provided segments for the video, so if you are only interested in certain classes, then try hovering over the timeline bar or looking at the description. Now, before we get started, I'd like to quickly mention two things. One of them being that during this beta test, there will be a free character boost that each player can use a single time once they had already leveled their first class to 50. This way everyone can try at least two classes without having to manually level up both of them. The other thing is something I feel like is very important to mention in a video like this. Every single class in this game can complete all the content there is in Lost Ark. So there is really no reason to worry about picking a weak class or whatever. The most important thing to look out for when picking your class is to pick something that seems appealing toward your playstyle and that you think you're going to have a lot of fun playing it. Even if you spend some time on a class and feel like you made the wrong decision, there's nothing to worry about because you can make your first class or your first character rather into an alt in the long run, and you can start leveling a different class whenever you feel like it. I'm making this video in a way that even those of you who have no idea about Lost Ark can understand everything I talk about, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I still need to explain some simple things in order to really help you guys make your choice for your first class. I will also only talk about the 15 classes that are going to be available in the beta and at launch. Alright, so the very first thing that I want you to understand is that even though Lost Ark is an MMO, it's not your typical DPS, support and tank kind of game. Lost Ark has two classes that are considered supports, and the rest of them are basically DPS classes, with all their own little differences between each other, which makes choosing a single one of them a very difficult decision to make. So, if you are looking to play a support class in Lost Ark, you will have to choose between Bard and Paladin. The main difference between these two classes from a party standpoint is that Bard has to choose between a big burst heal for the whole party or a big damage buff for them as her identity ability, while on the other hand, Paladin will provide a big damage buff and an overtime heal with his identity ability. From their regular abilities, both classes provide mostly shields, damage reduction and even more damage buffs to their party. So, in order to make it as simple as possible, basically Bard is the more defensive option for a party with the ability to burst heal the whole party, while if you're looking for more damage buffs, Paladin will be able to help more. Bard is a tiny bit harder to play in my opinion due to her lower mobility, and she also requires good timing with her damage buffs in order to maximize her supporting capabilities. If you are looking at the two of them from a gameplay standpoint, however, then both classes have very great AoE abilities for solo content and less great single target abilities, but assigning the right tripods to your abilities for certain content will help a lot with that. Bard is a bit better at crowd controlling big areas, while Paladin gets to opt into a good amount of extra mobility with some small dashes, as well as a lot of extra movement speed from some of his abilities. Oh, and also both of these classes are incredibly good at PvP. Now, if you're looking for a class that is basically the closest to being a tank in Lost Ark, then look no more, because Gunlancer is the class that you are looking for. He is able to shield himself, and thanks to his shields and received damage reductions he gets, the Gunlancer can ignore a lot of incoming damage and focus on dealing damage, which makes him a great DPS class. He also has a taunt ability that can be used to interrupt boss patterns in raids, making the boss much more vulnerable to the party. Gunlancer is a very simple class to play, but has less mobility than most other classes in exchange for all his defensive abilities. Gunlancer also has, I believe, the shortest spacebar cooldown, which helps with his low mobility, though his spacebar ability is awkward in a way that instead of rolling or dashing forward, he takes a little hop backwards, so it might take some time getting used to it. Gunlancer is a great option if you are looking for more of a laid-back experience. Let's actually continue with the classes that I consider very unique. You will pick one of these classes if you're looking for something that is a bit different from your usual experience when playing games that are similar to Lost Ark. These classes are Soulfist, Artillerist, and Shadowhunter. Out of these 3 classes, I only really have any experience on Shadowhunter, as she's the class that I myself ended up maining on the Russian server. Shadowhunter has a good variety of abilities for different ranges, ground control and mobility, and after being in combat for a short period of time, they can take on a demon form in which they can start ripping and tearing. After optimizing your endgame build, you will realize that it's in your best interest to opt into her class engraving that makes it possible to turn back into the demon form much more often, and also deal a lot more damage while in it. By assigning the right tripods and picking the proper accessories, you can spend the majority of the time in demon form while you're in combat. I must say, even after playing this class so much, I still find it very charming to jump around in demon form and make my whole screen explode. It feels great. Next up is the Artillerist. Now this class is something, I must say. Artillerist is one of the more difficult classes, thanks to his highest damage dealing abilities requiring a very good timing and getting used to. He is probably the tankiest of the ranged classes, since he has a shield ability that also grants CC immunity to some extent, and he also has a shield by using his class identity, which makes him enter siege mode. He has a very fun kit for PvP, but his long cooldowns and his lack of mobility will leave you open a lot of the times, so be mindful of that. If mastered, Artillerist can be a great DPS, but his kit is definitely not for everyone. That being said, he is still an incredibly fun class to play, so don't feel intimidated by the difficulty scaling. If you think you might like the class, make sure to give it a try. And our final unique class is none other than the Soulfist. Her kit makes her a close to mid-range fighter, and she's definitely one of the hardest classes to master in Lost Ark. Instead of mana, that most other classes spend using their abilities, Soulfist uses her energy. Once she runs out of energy, she can no longer use her abilities until her energy bar completely refills itself. Her identity allows her to move up in stages, each stage granting more damage, attack speed, cooldown recovery rate, and increased energy recovery. After leaving the 3rd stage, she loses all her buffs from her identity. This makes it so playing Soulfist feels like you can go Super Saiyan mode for a short period, dishing out crazy DPS, and then you fall off a bit until you can again enter your higher identity stages. Soulfist is also one of the best PvP classes, but her lack of CC immunity makes her really hard to play against good players. If you want to feel like you are playing as Goku from Dragon Ball Z, Soulfist should be a great class for you. If you have not made your mind up after hearing about these 5 classes, I assume you might be looking for something that's a very stable choice as a main starter class, something that will do well at all times and doesn't require too much thought. In that case, the best class for you might be Berserker. Berserker is a very straightforward class with some big hitting abilities, a decent amount of mobility, as well as some CC. He carries around a huge sized sword and he goes nuts with it. His identity ability lets him enter a state in which he gets a decent amount of increased attack speed, movement speed, and critical strike chance for a certain period of time. One of his class engravings lets him enter this state a lot more often, and it's sort of mandatory for endgame to make the class feel less slow, since some of his abilities may feel a bit sluggish in his regular state. The simplicity of this class allows you to pay more attention to all the endgame mechanics, and this way you can learn a lot about the game very quickly. The only downside to playing Berserker is that his abilities tend to have long cooldowns, and in PvP it's really easy to run out of mana. Though in my opinion, since I'm a sucker for big swords and badass manly cosmetics and avatars, Berserker is worth playing just for how sick you can make him look. Now, if you're looking for something that has a much higher skill gap, but in exchange provides a very versatile kit with a lot of mobility and range, then you should be trying either Deadeye or his female counterpart, Gunslinger. Though they seem very similar, there are just enough differences between these 2 classes to talk about them separately. Both of these classes can switch between their pair of pistols, shotguns, or sniper rifles. The pistols are mostly used for mobility purposes, but they can still deal damage and have some great tools, especially for PvP, like a freezing grenade or a CC immune jump. Pistols are also great for crowd controlling or dealing with small packs of monsters. Shotguns provide some very nice close-range burst damage, and Deadeye's main damage lies in shotguns as well, unless you are using a certain class engraving, which I will be explaining in a moment. And finally, the sniper rifle, as you might have guessed, lets the two of these classes deal damage from very long range. Gunslinger's main damage also lies in her sniper rifle. With 3 different weapons, they have a solid amount of abilities, each of them with different cooldown times that you need to keep track of, making these two classes rather difficult to play until you really get used to them. So there's a way to make Deadeye from one of the hardest classes to play into one of the simplest, and that is by using one of his class engravings, which erases his shotgun and his sniper rifle, leaving only his pistols in his hand. In exchange for removing the rest of his guns, his pistol's damage gets boosted just enough to make this build actually viable. However, using other engravings and all 3 of your guns will deal more damage, but will also make the gameplay a lot more sweaty. Now, the main difference between Gunslinger and Deadeye is that the male counterpart mostly relies on staying close range and using his shotguns to attack bosses from behind, utilizing the extra back attack damage, while Gunslinger deals most of her damage from long distance, and therefore she does not need to stay close to bosses nearly as much as Deadeye does, allowing for more time and space to dodge incoming attacks. Gunslinger also has her own simplifying class engraving, but hers only removes the shotgun from her belt in exchange for extra crit chance on her other guns. Now let's talk about the remaining martial artist classes. In case you're looking for some fast-paced close-range combat with lots of movement abilities that allow for an in and out kind of playstyle, then you will probably enjoy playing Wardancer and her male counterpart, Striker. The 2 of these classes are different from other classes in a way that they don't have a specific identity ability to activate, and rather they store something called ki while engaging in combat in order to expand it by using skills that require certain amounts of ki. This might sound a bit intimidating, but it really is a very simple concept. For example, out of your 8 skills, you can use 6 at any time, and by hitting enemies with them, you generate your ki. If you have enough ki, you can use it to activate one of your 2 abilities that require ki, depending on the situation you're in. Both Striker and Wardancer have fast attacks and great mobility, but Wardancer is a bit more swift, while Striker is a tiny bit slower, but has bigger damage numbers in exchange. Both of them are very fun to play, and they are definitely among the faster classes. And they are pretty simple as well, as long as we're talking about PvE. In PvP, their combos are hard to pull off, and they don't have much CC immunity, so they are difficult to play in PvP, but very rewarding once you get the hang of it. So out of these 2 classes, if you want something more fast-paced, pick Wardancer, and if you want something a bit slower, but more of a heavy hitter, then pick Striker. This leaves us with the last martial artist class, the Scrapper. She is definitely the class that hits the hardest out of all the martial artists. Though she doesn't have as much mobility as Wardancer or Striker does, she is still very capable of getting around places with some jumps, dashes, and a very unique spacebar ability that lets her dash twice instead of only once. Meaning you can chain 2 spacebars into your combos or cover long distances by using it back to back. Scrapper does not use mana and also does not have an activatable identity ability. Instead, she accumulates a yellow and a green energy resource by using her abilities. Some of her abilities use the yellow resource, others use the green one. And by using one or the other, you generate the opposite resource. This makes it so you need to balance your abilities in a way that allows for the use of all of your abilities on your hotkeys. There are certain builds that make this resource system very easy to handle. To sum it up, Scrapper is a great all-around pick, as a main character, has very high impact attacks, with a decent amount of mobility and crowd control. Not to mention, she is also a very strong PvP pick, with a good amount of CC immunity and very good abilities to catch people from a distance and lock them down in place, and also to chase them around the arena. Let's now talk about our second mage class, the Summoner. As her name suggests, she summons multiple companions to fight alongside her. Some of them stay around and chase targets, while others she only summons for a brief moment to help her cast her abilities. For example, she can summon a gigantic phoenix that she sends across the battlefield to deal huge area damage in a long distance. Some of her abilities have a long cast time, which locks her in place before she can finish casting the ability, leaving her vulnerable. She doesn't have too much mobility and relies on decent positioning and her crowd controlling abilities for her safety. She is pretty simple to pick up, thanks to her summons dealing a decent amount of her damage, so you can focus on dodging mechanics in raids while occasionally casting your riskier abilities when you feel like you're in a safe position. Summoner is also a very decent PvP pick, but she relies on her offense and doesn't have too many tools to keep herself safe, so she is easily caught by experienced players or by classes that have a lot of mobility and CC immunity. Still, if you're looking for something simple to play with lots of range and AoE, Summoner is a great choice for you. We have two more classes to go. One of them, which is our last melee class, the Deathblade. Deathblade is the closest you're going to get to a rogue/assassin kind of playstyle in Lost Ark, at least until the release of Reaper or other similar classes. Deathblade has a wide range of abilities that allow for some very satisfying combos with lots of mobility options, decent AoE, and even some reliable CC. Picking up the class might not seem too difficult, however mastering it to some extent will take a good amount of time and practice for most players. This is probably the main reason she is not too much of a popular class choice, because she also relies on certain engravings such as Supercharge and Backstabbing Master to deal good damage in PvE content. PvP, on the other hand, is a whole different story. Deathblade is a very powerful choice for PvP, especially in capable hands. She has many tools to catch people and deal devastating damage in a large area. Many of her abilities provide her with certain levels of CC immunity in order to escape bad situations or to close the gap between her and her opponents. Starting out on the Western servers, most classes that would give a hard time to Deathblade are not going to be available, so she's going to be even that much stronger at launch. Also, as I previously mentioned, even if a class like Deathblade really shines in PvP, it can still complete every content in Lost Ark, so don't be hesitant about picking it up if you want to do both PvP and PvE. Finally, we are left with our final class of the video, the Sharpshooter. So, if you have played League of Legends before, you probably know the two champions called Varus and Quinn. Now, what if I told you that they had a baby and the baby is a Sharpshooter from Lost Ark? Because basically that's how the class feels to play. You can fire a charged arrow from a great distance, you have just enough mobility to reposition yourself easily, some close range getaway abilities, and you can even summon a bird to fight alongside you. As you can see in the playing clips, Sharpshooter wields a big ass bow as his weapon and he truly feels like a ranged class. Most of his actual damage comes from his long range abilities and he has mediocre cooldown times that allow for a good amount of time to pay attention to raid mechanics and not dying. In PvP, he can be very annoying to play against, especially in lower tiers. Sharpshooter is a rather simple class to play and a mostly safe choice for your first class. I would advise you pick him if you want something that keeps a safe distance most of the time and if you want to play a class with a bow, of course. And this basically concludes this video. I genuinely hope I was able to help all of you who had no idea what class to play in the beta or on release, and that now you have a clear idea on how all these classes function and why you would pick one or the other. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section and I will do my best to reply as well as I can. If I was able to help you with this video, please consider giving it a like. It would be very much appreciated as I put a lot of effort into my videos, as well as maybe share it with your friends who might want to play Lost Ark as well. I have lots of Lost Ark content planned for the near future, so make sure to subscribe to my channel, and if you also want to catch my occasional live streams on Twitch, follow my channel there as well. Thank you all very much for watching. Have fun playing the beta, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.